you've clicked this video, please watch this full thing. I desperately need your help. I'm currently working on a video on the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, one of my personal favorite moments in history, when I stumbled across a mystery. As many know, the World Fair was a big deal around the turn of the century. Every year it was held somewhere in the world, starting in 1791 and going all the way into the 1900s. In 1876, at the World's Fair in Philadelphia, Alexander Graham Bell displayed his telephone for the very first time. It was pretty much Comic-Con, but for actual stuff. Following the World Fair in Paris in 1889, where the frickin' Eiffel Tower was built, Chicago had a tall order to make their World Fair compete. So, they outsourced it to a pro. If you are a fan of the Devil in the White City novel by Eric Larson, you are already familiar with all of this. They hired George Washington Gale Ferris Jr. to design and build it, and it was intended to be their big competitor to the Eiffel Tower. It was huge. At around 264 feet, it was by far the largest thing at the exhibition. It was also the world's very first Ferris wheel. This Ferris wheel has extreme historical significance, especially to me, so I decided to trace it. After the 1893 World Fair, it traveled to St. Louis, where in 1904 it was used again in their World Fair. Not as exciting the second time, but at least we are still able to track its whereabouts. Here's the thing. After the 1904 St. Louis World Fair, it was dynamited and sold for scrap metal. No clue why, but the axle of the Ferris wheel was notably not destroyed at all due to it being too big for them to destroy it with the technology that they had at the time. Which just goes to show you how big this thing really was. It was miraculously kept intact. The trail goes cold, and everything about it from then on out is merely a theory. So, where is it? There are multiple theories as to what happened to it, so let's go through each of them together and see if we can solve the mystery. 5 years ago, the St. Louis World Fair Appreciation Society, which is a real thing that exists, shout out to y'all, conducted a thorough investigation to see if they could get to the bottom of it. They then presented what they think happened to the public. They found evidence that it was taken back to Chicago, where it sat until technology was advanced enough to cut it down and sell it for scrap parts, much like the rest of the wheel. This is backed loosely by documentation, but I'm not sure how reliable that documentation is because I couldn't find it. However, this theory was also backed up when the daughter of the Chicago House Wrecking Company said that she remembered seeing it when she was a child. I'm sure at some point they did melt a big piece of metal and sell it for scraps, but how would a 6-year-old know what the axle to the 1893 Chicago World Fair's Ferris wheel would even look like? I don't know. Another theory, shout out to Not Enough Coffee on Reddit, by the way, he was very helpful in collecting all the theories, was that the axle was buried, and when they were building the Wydown School in Missouri, the crew excavating found a large metallic object that was too big to move, and it seemingly fit the size of the axle. The piece of metal was so big and immovable that they actually built the school a couple of feet away. Another theory is that in Chicago in World War II, they hoped to recover the axle to contribute the metal to the war effort. There were witnesses who remembered where it was buried. When they got there, there was no axle to be found. 2 other witnesses in the crowd claimed to have witnessed the events of the melting of the axle, but one said that it was actually at the burial site, which was right under where the Ferris wheel was initially displayed. And the other said it was cut up and shipped off. 2 completely different stories. The latter makes literally 0 sense because the technology to cut up the axle had still yet to be invented. So that one is definitely wrong. I also think it just doesn't make sense. It would have only gotten you around $900 in scrap metal money, so the effort to get it makes no sense. Me and Not Enough Coffee are not buying it. I have saved for last possibly the most likely and thorough of the theories. Before we get into this last theory of the missing axle, let's go back and figure out how they even know where the Ferris wheel was placed in the 1904 World's Fair to begin with. In 1996, Professor Patrick Shore of the physics department at Washington University conducted a magnetic survey of the golf course in St. Louis, and then proceeded to survey the surrounding 1,371-acre park around it, which included science centers, museums, zoos, restaurants, and more golf courses. In doing this, they were able to pinpoint the exact location of where the Ferris wheel once stood. They then broadened the survey, searching using a ground-probing radar. And there it was. Underneath the ground, the radar picked up on something along Alexander Drive in Skinker Boulevard. Bingo. They used a local TV sponsor and went to dig it up, where they discovered just clay water pipes. Nice. This takes us to the actual theory. Later, specifically in 2007, a man with a background in geophysical exploration, Sheldon Briner, would be contacted to help in this search for the missing axle. Working with the aforementioned St. Louis World's Fair Society, they would again conduct a magnetic survey over sites around where the Ferris wheel was initially located. On Sunday, May 13th, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Briner searched. When he walked past the Wydown School, where Theory 2 claimed it was, he found no magnetic anomalies. Pretty much proving that theory completely incorrect. He would eventually find an anomaly that could not be ignored. Under Skinker Boulevard, around 200 feet south of where the Ferris wheel's base was, he found an object. The sizes of the object fit the loose estimations of the axle, described as around 7 to 10 feet under the surface. The road that covered it wasn't built until long after the fair was held, which strengthens its argument as the location of the missing axle. This could be it. However, with the road being on top of it, there was no way to verify its legitimacy. The size of the anomaly was roughly the same as the one from the study from 1996, where after Professor Shore swore that he had found it and unearthed it just to reveal pipes. So without excavation, we cannot confirm its legitimacy as the axle. So to this day, no record exists that has the axle being seen or touched since its initial burial in 1906. This is where you come in. I want to get to the bottom of it. I am on the hunt for the axle of the world's very first Ferris wheel. Is it in St. Louis? Is it buried in Chicago? Is it exactly where we think it is? That would suck. But I need you to share this as much as possible. If you work at an old folks home or have grandparents in the St. Louis or Chicago area who had their grandparents also in those cities, please show them this video. I need leads. And for that, I need as many eyes on this as possible. This thing was lost over 100 years ago, so there's nobody alive today that was there at the time of the initial disappearance. But that doesn't mean that there isn't somebody out there who knows something, and who knows how long that'll last. So time is very much of the essence. Please follow me because I intend to find it or at least learn more about its whereabouts. This game has gone on long enough, and it's more than time that I stepped in.